friends, on behalf of the Madras Book Club, I welcome you all to this meeting where we are going to see the Madras launch of the book Men and Dreams in the Dauladar by Kocheri C. Shibu. Ms. Shibu's journey to the world of letters took off from the small hamlet of Kangarapadi in Kochi to the tough terrain of Indian Navy where he commandeered warships. It ended at the mountainous Dauladar of Himachal, where he went to oversee a hydroelectric project. The minutes of life he saw there breathed life to the writer in him and resulted in his debut work, Men and Dreams in the Dauladar. We'll hear more about the book from Mr. Shibu later. Let me now take this opportunity to briefly introduce the other dignitaries participating in the program. The Prince of Arcot, who is going to launch the book, needs no introduction to the Chennai audience. In his capacity as the Prince of Arcot, Muhammad Abdul Ali heads a number of religious endowments, charitable organizations, and education trusts, and also manages the Waqf in the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Dr. Anita Balakrishnan, who will be in conversation with the author later, is an author critic. She is an associate professor in English at Queen's Mary's College, Chennai. She was an MPhil and a PhD from University of Madras. She has been published widely, both nationally and internationally, in journals such as South Asian Review and Language in India. Now, a few words about Madras Book Club. We are about 15 years old and began in a modest way, but started flourishing since the time we started having the meetings in Connemara. The last couple of years, the Madras Club has been conducting on average 2 meetings a month. We now have over 350 members. The annual subscription is $850 for individuals and $1,500 for couple. I now request Ms. Shibu to show you a video trailer of the book, after which the Prince of Arcot will formally release the book. And this will be followed by a brief talk on the book by Shibu. May I now request Prince of Arcot formally release the book, please.
That means may peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. That is the meaning of Assalamu Alaikum. Assalamu Alaikum is an Arabic greetings. Namaskaram, very good evening to all. The hero of today's function, Mr. Shibu Sahib, Dr. Anita Balakrishnan ji, our Commodore Garg ji is here, Mr. Rajan Saab, respected elders, my very old friend, Commodore Amar Saab was sitting there, who was the former naval officer in charge. Amar Mahadevanji, Madam is there, Doctor, she is a lady doctor, the wife of our Commodore Madhavanji. Dear sisters and brothers, and my good friend Mr. Faizur Rahman, who is here with us. I never expected that the function will start exactly sharp to 7 o'clock. That shows the climatic condition of Hotel Kanimara of the British times. Oh, our Shahul Sahib is here, our former chairman of All India Airport Authority and former Air Officer Commanding Tambaram is here with us. I wish to thank the organizers for having invited me to today's book launch function, which I deem it a great honor, and it's my privilege to be here amongst all learned audience, a dignified audience, but I can see by the very handsome and pretty faces here. I would like to correct my proper name to the organizers, which they have mentioned from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. His Highness Nawab Ghulam Muhammad Abdul Ali Khan Bahadur. I want to delete the gazette Ghulam and Khan Bahadur. I am not a Ghulam, I am a free man. And I am not Khan Bahadur, I am only Bhagdur. To run away. The Khan Bahadur titles were given only during British times. My grandfather, my great-grandfather and so on, all of us, all of them, they had the special honor of having the Khan Bahadur. I am only the title given by Shibu is Bhagdur. So, I think today's function is excellent function. As a matter of fact, I had some tight program today in my house itself. So I told Shibu Sahab and Commodore Vilas that I will come to this function. The book I have read in a glance in a very short time. It's a very good book, no doubt about that. The author has spent his time and energy, and by writing this book he has become more younger and younger today. He looks very handsome today. He is the happiest person today. Men and Dreams in the Dauladar is the story of three main personalities. Nanda, a young engineer from Kerala who is evading the law, and Khusru, a youth displaced from his native village in Kashmir, and Rekha, who is a doctor by profession and a passionate dancer who is in search of eternal love. Today there is no eternal love. I told my wife, where is the eternal love today? If you love me eternally. The three meet up in the remote hydroelectric project in the Himalayas due to a series of twists and turns in their lives. The novel is a wonderful tale of adventure, love, just revenge and emotions. The story moves in the backdrop of the hydroelectric project and provides rare glimpses into the unique life in the labor camps at the site of mega hydropower projects. The story line moves quite fast and spans the length and breadth of India, from Kashmir to Kerala and to Gujarat, as well as to Pakistan. Different plots get intertwined in the book and show the author's great insight into different aspects of human relationship, as well as cultural traits of different communities and societies and section of society. The novel is a thriller riding on a well-researched classic background of the hydroelectric projects and would connect with one and all readers on the subcontinent and readers abroad. Possibly, the video trailer is an indication to the readers as to what the novel holds in store. We have just seen that and hope after the tea and after the meeting the books are there on sale. If you are interested, please go and read. I had a glance, I had a good look on this overall book. It is a very good book. It is worth reading that book today. And above all, book reading habit is a very good habit, according to me. Even I tell my children, my sons and my grandchildren, you must have the regular habit of reading the books. By reading books, you get more knowledge, you get more information, and instead of wasting much of our time on seeing TVs and playing these games on the television or on the internet. That is, I don't think that is that much worth today. Reading books, variety of books, it is very good in today's life. My dear sisters and brothers, I always cannot conclude my address without expressing and to bring to your kind notice that we are lucky that we are born in India and we are living in India. Especially, I used to tell my Muslim community everywhere, Mr. Faizur Rahman is aware, that we Muslims are lucky and secure, and also we are very happy in India rather than the Muslims in other countries. In other countries, as we are saying every day we are seeing the Muslims are killing Muslims. They don't see whether it is a mosque, they don't see whether it is a hotel, they don't see whether it is a platform. But by the grace of Almighty God, in India, we are all living together as brothers and sisters. That is India, that is its culture, that is its tradition. We may have different faiths, we may have different languages, cultures, traditions, experience and so on. But India is a lovable country. We only know the value of India when we go outside India. I'm telling you honestly. Once we go out somewhere for a few months or for a few years, our soul, our body, everything will be in India. Because the Indian type of life, the affection, the love, the regards we get from our own family members, from the friends and so on, which you cannot find outside. In Western world, you know, even if the children fall sick, the parents, they don't visit hospitals because they are afraid of the infection either side. And once the children grew, they don't just, like a birds and animals, after certain nipapa, you go and see your work. That affection, that love, they don't have. In Arab countries, same problem. But in India, whether we become father or grandfather or great-great-grandfather, that affection and love continues. India is a secular country. India is not a theocracy. India cannot become a communal state. Never. I really tell you from the depth of my heart, may Almighty God be witness to my statement, majority of our Indians, including our Hindu brethren, more than 80-85%, they don't want India to become a communal state. They want India should remain a secular state. Secularism, you know, how we depend on oxygen. If there is no oxygen, we will not be alive. The same thing applies to our nation, to our country. If there is no secularism, India will die. So preserve secularism, protect secularism. India is a great country. Let us not involve ourselves in petty things, in small minor things, creating communal clashes, communal conflicts, to find place to God, where I can give place to God, whether in Amir Mahal or in Kailash Mahal. God is there within ourselves. God is seeing us. God knows what is happening. Even the secret in your heart, even if you don't spell out, the Almighty knows your intention, what is there in your mind and heart. Respect every religion, my dear sisters and brothers. Don't hate me because I belong to a certain particular community, or I should not hate you because you belong to certain other community. India has produced so many great people from different religions. Even Muslims, they have fought and gave their lives during independence. And no authority, nobody has got any right to tell the Muslims to get out to Pakistan. Why should we go to Pakistan? Every time, Muslims, get out, poda. Pakistan po. If Christians are there, they will be targeted, poda in Vatican. What nonsense is going on in our country? We want good leaders. We want good leaders who can lead us, not to create disharmony and hatred among each other. Such a great country, such a great people are here who have produced so many things in this great country. Scientists are there, doctors are there, architects, engineers, politicians, they are all there. In foreign countries, Indians are more respected. In Arab countries, they hold high position, number 2 position. They don't see that you are a Hindu or a Christian, no. Indians command very high respect in foreign countries. But in our own country, we are nothing. We are only fit to create conflicts. That should not be, my dear sir. I tell you respectfully, I tell you. I am proud that again and again I say, our Commodore Madhavanji knows that my forefathers also ruled much of South India. This is not the platform to talk, but since we are all very decent audience, I want to tell you, my forefathers ruled much of South India for more than 100 years. This Kanimara hotel land, it became later on. But this place, one of the palaces of the Arcot Nawabs for Lord Robert Clive. My great ancestors had 13 palaces in Madras city alone. The main palace was Chepak Palace, where today you will find the PWD offices, Senate House, University of Madras and so on. That was our palace. The Nawabship, our ruling period, came to an end in 1801. The Britishers, the East India Company, became very powerful. And in 1801, they took over the administration of the Carnatic. We were known as Nawabs of Carnatic or Nawabs of Arcot. In 1801 till 1855, we were only the titular head of the Carnatic state, like how today Queen Elizabeth is there in England. In 1855, the British took the advantage because the Nawab at that time in 1855, he passed away without a male issue. The doctrine of lapse was adopted, Dalhousie's policy, and the Nawabship, the title of Nawabship also came to an end. And his own paternal uncle, Chacha Chitappa, he was conferred with English title Prince of Arcot, from Nawab of Carnatic to the Prince of Arcot. So from 1855, this very dignified and very honorary position, being the Prince of Arcot, it is something we are really thankful to Government of India even today. And I think we are the only family in India who continue to be recognized with this title by the President of India. And the Chepak Palace was taken over in 1855. And Amir Mahal, where we stay, that was constructed by British, and we shifted from Kalas Mahal, Grand Chepak Palace, to Amir Mahal. In the line of Prince of Arcot, I am the 8th. From the Nawabs of the Carnatic, from 1691, I am the 22nd. And above all, I am proud that my family traces the lineage from the second Caliph of Islam, Umar. I take you back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon his time. And during the Muhammad Ali Walaja, you know, the most celebrated of the Nawab, Walaja Road, Walaja Baad, Walaja Gate, Walaja Pet, so many places were named. From 1749 till 1795, he was an independent sovereign ruler for 46 years. I'm proud, I'm not boasting, I'm not just telling like that. It is history. History cannot be erased. History cannot be changed. During his one man, who was the 8th Nawab of Carnatic, he gave many lands to our Hindu brethren for construction of temples. The history reveals there are more than 300 temples in South India stands on the land given by the Nawab Walaja. To Christian missionaries, St. Heber Bishop College, Trichy, St. Joseph College, Trichy, 100% land given by Nawab Walaja. And His Holiness Jayendra Saraswati Ji Swami from Kanchipuram, he visited Amir Mahal in 1991 as a special case when I invited. I had one-to-one talk even with Paramacharya. With Jayendra Saraswati Ji, he said, I will come to your house because you are inviting me. So he came. I invited general public, open platform. And the first thing Swamiji said, in the history of Kanchipuram Mutt, not in his lifetime history, in the history of the Kanchipuram Mutt, I am visiting a Muslim house first time. Because of your forefathers' connections, and Kanchipuram alone, there are more than 100 Hindu temple stands on the land given by Arcot Nawab. I felt happy. My father was weeping. Such country, my dear friends. I am not, nor my family had aspired for any favors from the government, nor I expect any position in the government. No. We are social workers. From beginning, my forefathers doing social service. Every time we invite all religious leaders to Amir Mahal. The Archbishop of Canterbury has come. 3 different people, each two times. Chief Imam from the holy Mecca, Kaaba has come. What I want to say, this is our India, this is our Indians. That should be the main thing in our heart, to respect each other, not to demolish any worship place of anybody. I can challenge. If any religion says, go and demolish the place of other religion, it doesn't belong to that particular religion at all. So I don't want to take this, time and platform to speak about my own family. It doesn't look good. But what to do? I have to tell today that we want peace and harmony. Without peace and harmony, no country in the world can progress, no country in the world can develop, whether it can be America or any big superpowers. Unless peace is there, nothing will happen. And all of us must strongly condemn terrorism. Nobody like. Today the Western world is labeling Islam, labeling Muslims. There's a religion of terrorism. How can it be? Assalamu alaikum itself, may peace be upon you. The Holy Quran strictly forbids us to go and kill innocent people. No, you can read Quran. Not for any on religious ground. Read what Quran says. If Quran says, yes, go and kill, go and murder, go and destroy any place, there's no peace, there's nothing. Why this Islam is being labeled and targeted as a religion of terrorism? Anyhow, may Almighty keep us all under His special care and protection. And I wish our Shibbu Sahib must write more and more books on secularism also, on harmony also. That will give a weight for you. That is a need of the hour. I have taken a lot of time. I once again congratulate our Shibbu Sahib. I thank Commodore Gaji, who have told me long time back about this function, and I wish you all happiness. Thank you.
And good message to all of us of City of Chennai by His Highness. Before we go on the proceedings further, I want to put this moment to a lighter side. Probably I am the only serving military also sitting in this crowd of many senior military officers and of course senior citizens are here. Me and I see the history of the book when Shibbu joined the new job and he was in Dhauladhar. And we got into telephone communications. So what are you doing? He said, I'm writing a book. That's shock to me. I said, you done a job to write a book? Then it goes back to many years back in 1990. We were both in a ship serving together. We were young officers. And Shibbu had a habit. He had a car those days with him. We used to go somewhere in the night after dinner. He says, let's start making a story. So he used to make plot to plot, take the robber to somebody's house, and you name the story, maybe from socialism to we went all the stories we used to make. But I'm very happy to come up with the book now, which is the story of the book when he says, my book is completed. Can you help me in Chennai? I said, please come. Chennai got profound readers. The son of Madras Book Club is here. And today he's here in front of all of us. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much.
Let me formally thank His Highness the Prince of Arcot. One for, of course, all the pearls of wisdom and the encouraging words. And more so, a hint for the plot of my next book. So you've given me enough of history. So I delve quite a bit into history, so I guess that'll come. And the next book is, I got a, let's say, kind of takeoff point. So first, before I start, I want to thank His Highness once again, Dr. Anida, who is here, the Madras Book Club, and Commodore Vijesh Garg, my friend in distress, brother in arm, friends of yesteryears, who has made this happen. And thank all my friends and all my senior colleagues who have taken the time out to come here, and the members of Madras Book Club. Before I start, like he said, everything starts with a story, because India has got a long oral tradition. And whilst we say we must write and we must read, the oral tradition of India doesn't die out. So before I talk about my novel, let me tell you a story. The story is about corporate consultancy. Large number of you are familiar with the private sector and corporates and consultancy. So this is a story which was narrated to me by somebody whilst I was writing this book. So he says, the story is about a village in Rajasthan where for any event you take consultancy from a village held. The village elder is called a Negi Sahab. And consultancy is called Salah Lena. Salah Lena in Hindi means to take advice. So one day there was a small instance, there was a goat which was eating something from a small matka and it's got head stuck inside. So they tried pulling it out, it was not coming out. So someone said, let's break it. The chap said, no, let's call Negi Sahab, let's say consultancy. Salah Lena. So send a boy running to call the Negi Sahib. So Negi Sahib travels on a camel. He came to the village on a camel, and in the entrance of the village there was a small arch. So his head was at level with the arch, then people looked at him, he looked at them. Then he said, Tod do. So village said, okay, let's break the arch down. They broke the arch down. He came inside. So he got down and went around the goat 3 times. So then he told him, here, you chop off the head. We looked at him like this. Then they said, Negi Sahib, consultant is saying so. I said, okay, chop the head off. So after that, they said, pull it out now. I said, it's not coming out. He said, break the matka. So then someone breaks it. So he said, solved. So people looked at me a little confused. Okay, Negi Sahib is saying so, must be. So then after that, he put his hands to his head and, sat down and is looking very worried. So the whole villagers were worried that, Negi Sahib is worried, so there was something very serious. So he asked him, Negi Sahib, what happened? He says, now I am there to give you consultancy. I am worried what's going to happen after I die. So I guess, in India, the way we function and the number of things that we do has got its own traditions in every walk of life, depending on where we are and what we are. So writing this book, it's been an old dream of mine. I did a post-graduation in English literature from Pune University in '89 to take up writing. And I could start only in 2009, so about 20 years down the line. It took me 4 years to complete it, on an average of 3 hours a day, about 70 hours a month, about 3,600 man-hours to write 400 pages, so about 9 man-hours per page. To put it simply, this is just to give an idea of the effort. And whilst writing, as usual, there's been an effort, what His Highness has said, a lot of it is reflected. What he said should be, it is there in that book. Possibly, those who will read will see. When I say the title, when I given the title to the book, I'll just say, if you sum it up, it says, I believe there is no shelf life for dreams, and there is no age limit for dreaming. And it is dreams that drive on, and that's something which I saw that, when I worked in this hydroelectric projects where there's 1,000 people or 1,200 people, and many of them, especially if you work in the northern Himalayas where the terrain is not friendly, and if you work in tunnels, there's always a risk to life. And irrespective of the precautions that you take by the book, what is laid down, it doesn't stop the hill from collapsing someday and taking somebody's life, or a landslide coming and taking somebody's life. It's a reality. And so many of them risk their life, in ways which are comparable to the armed forces, because it's a challenging environment and you put your life in risk to do a job. You get through, you're a winner, you don't. At times it's a limb or a life that goes. But then all of them, it's very surprising that, in a mass from, whether it's a kind of pot boiler in the sense that, hydroelectric projects also, you have people from Nepal, from Kerala, from West Bengal, from, J&K, all kinds of people who meet, and it's a kind of cultural pot boiler. And it has got its own dimensions. It's like in a life which starts when the project starts and which ends at the end of 4 or 5 years when the project gets over. With a value system, a code of conduct, and so many nuances which start with the project and die with the project. So, a lot of which I've captured. So before I talk any further, I'll just read out a couple of pages for what is being talked about. His attention was caught by someone waving from a motorcycle parked across the road. It must be the Munshi, he thought. In a minute, he was in the camper and the vehicle drove off in the opposite direction. After a while, they stopped in front of a small double-storied building with a board in red and white which read Lala Construction Company. Munshi pointed to a room adjacent to the office, indicating the place of stay. Nanda left his belongings in the room and they set off for the marketplace with Nanda perched on the Munshi's old motorcycle. The moving sensation was painted on the sides of the bike in white letters. He wondered if the Munshi knew what the words meant. They stopped in front of a stall with a heap of woolens, with a prominent flat 40% off discount tag that hung from the ceiling. They picked up a few items and soon they were back at Nanda's new abode. Munshi told Nanda to come back after he put on something warm. He would wait for him outside. Nanda took a quick look around the room and noticed 4 cots, a metal locker beside each one, a wooden cupboard and a writing table squeezed into one corner. All along the walls, clothes were hanging on an improvised clothesline. A strong smell of stale sweat pervaded the room. There were 2 incense sticks burning in front of a photo of Lord Ganesh hanging on the wall. The toilet and the bathrooms were outside, and a small washing machine stood by the door. There were more clothes drying on the line outside. Nanda heard the Munshi's persistent honking and he rushed out. They went up the tarred road and then turned off into a kacha road with a board that read Hydroelectric Project. Nanda noticed the paint peeling off in places, mud splattered all over, smudging the already faint letters. The motorcycle bumped and rocked over the potholes and puddles, splashing through the mud. On one side of the road, farmers were plowing their fields, the narrow plows cutting through the fresh earth. The fields were small, 4 to 5 cents on average, step cut into the steep hill. It formed a picturesque sight with the people working at different levels and in close proximity. Nanda was awestruck by the sheer majesty of the mountains towering above everything else in the vicinity. The Dhauladhar range, also known as the Outer Himalayas, started from Dalhousie in the northwest of Himachal Pradesh, close to the Pir Panjal range, and extended all the way to Badrinath near Gadwal in the east. The snow line of the mountains rose to nearly 6,000 meters in the center, and the peaks of the Dhauladhar changed color every season. From the white shroud of winter, they put on a streak pattern of snow lines in summer. The locals believed that the mountains had a mind of their own, and the patterns of the snow reflected their moods. The people living in the hills used a well-defined network of routes along the ridges of the Dhauladhar and the Pir Panjal range to traverse into Kashmir and back. This is introducing the Dhauladhar ranges, which forms the title. The second chapter is about the pulse of the actual project. The rains had caused problems in the tunnel work at the AM Hydro site also. Because there was excessive seepage, the dewatering pumps from the Katora site were also sent there. Goraj is inspecting tunnel in waist deep water. Top management have removed their pants of walking with him, Koki said with a loud booming laugh. They were in the yard restarting the fabrication work. Nanda heard a loud noise from the river. It sounded like a train travelling at full speed. The decibel kept increasing as if the train was approaching. He was reminded of the Doppler theory classes of the Brennan school days. The physics teacher's favorite example to explain the Doppler effect was that of the sound of an approaching train. Cloudburst, flash flood coming. Nanda heard someone shouting. Everyone was running towards the khad. He could not believe his eyes. In the distance, he saw a white, foamy wave travelling at considerable speed down the river. The grinding noise of the boulders became deafening as the wave approached. Huge rocks were throwing to the side as the wave moved forward, scattering everything in its path. Nanda had never seen a flash flood before. He was awestruck. The surging water appeared like a giant cobra on the move. Above, the day was clear and sunny. The village kul and the water intake were choked by the silt in no time. Soon the river churned muddy, brown and turned a dull red. In an hour's time, the water was receding. A short while later, a message came that some men had been swept off the weir and that the labour was running away. Nanda was trying to reach the weir site on the phone when he received a call from Lalaji. Nanda, find out the status of the weir, get our people from across the cut to this side, he ordered. The roads were still intact as they reached the weir site in minutes. Loud wails assailed them. 4 drillers got washed away, he heard one of the workers say. This is just to give an introduction of, let's say, the challenges of a project life and the kind of environment in which the book was written on. That aside, the process of writing and the process of writing a book with many of the people who ask me this question is, you come from a military background, you've been in the Indian Navy, why didn't you write about the military story or a military background? One of the questions that was come in almost every forum. So I told them that will follow, that will come to us naturally. So I said, let me write a civilized book first, then the military one will follow. So I guess, as the saying goes, when you come outside, people say there are the civilized people and then we are the military people. So the writing of the book has been an experience which has gone from various shades. Possibly one of the biggest challenges was that, it's when you write on a daily basis, you have decided to take on, bring in almost every aspect of the Indian society into the book. You've got 3 main characters and there are about 7, 8 smaller characters. And as you start writing, as the time moves forward, you find that, in 3 hours you want to write in a day, 2 hours goes in orienting your mind and finding out who was where. And then there's like a ops room in the, ASW days when you're trying to plot and see where that submarine is. It is something like that. Till it reaches a day when suddenly everything becomes clear. I mean, the best example I can give is cricket. Those of us who have played cricket will know in the initial days, someone is coming to bowl and is standing to bat. You see the bowler, then after that you don't see anything, you take the bat and, just swing. It hits, connects, very good. And as you practice, maybe over a number of years, then you see the bowler, you see the ball getting released, then you are able to connect to the ball. And after some time, you can see all the fielders around you and where you want to hit and where it goes. And in the end, you can, where the whole thing is, it's in your mind. I guess even writing novel for the first time, maybe, I guess there are some seasoned writers in this audience who have told me they will appreciate this possibly better. But to my military audience, a number of them who will possibly look at this, it's something like writing a war game single-handed. The only thing is you can decide the time, how long you want to take. There's no time limit of doing it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You can take 2 years or 3 years. But you have to be everything. So you have to define everything and you have to direct everything and go across. And second part is about language. This is about something about, about India again. In my audience, I remember the first time I went to Vizag, I asked someone the time. So he said, what's the time? He told me 10 less 4. 10 less 4? I said, yeah, 10 less 4. Then I had an old friend of mine from India, he says, GV, what is this 10 less 4 here? So no, Shibu, in Telugu we normally talk like that. So when he converts to English, you translate it 10 less 4. So then I said, yeah, that's correct. What is wrong in it? He said, yeah, we may not be familiar, but to us it comes to us naturally. So English, what is used naturally by one part of the country, may not be so natural because we are used to following that, the Brit dictum. So one of the efforts in this has been that, when people say regional language, someone was telling me this, Telugu is a regional language. I said, what's so regional about it? You've got 100 million people who speak Telugu, and it's in terms of sheer reach of numbers, it's comparable to French, German, Japanese, any language. So what is so regional? In the reach of the number of people using the language, so you have got, let's say, taken in the subcontinent, you've got about 200 million people who speak Bengali, 200 million people who speak maybe 150 Punjabi, about 100 plus million of Marathi, 100 plus million of Tamil, 100 plus million of Telugu, maybe about 400 million of Hindi. In their own right, each of those languages, by sheer reach of the people, are comparable to any of the European languages. There is nothing regional about it. So in that language, when you write, let's say, when you tried to use as much, the hero is from Kerala, so there's a fair amount of sprinkle of Malayalam. So let's say that events are happening in Himachal Pradesh, a fair amount of Pahadi, then there is Bengali, there is some foreigners in the pictures of foreign languages. So one of the things that I've tried to put across to the Indian readers, I'm saying that it is not possible for all of us to know all the languages, but we can appreciate. So the English audience of today, which is a recent trend in the last 10 years, where you've got a large percentage of people who read Indian books and Indian authors' books. So they can be exposed to, let's say, even some of the very, usages which are, let's say, typically colloquial or maybe very classy in the sense, where I've had people from Himachal who tell me after reading this, where did you get this proverb from Himachali from? I said, got it from a Himachali. He said, I've been there all my life, but I never heard of this. I said, okay, that makes 2 of us. So I guess it's if you respect our Indians and Indian languages and move forward, then definitely. And it's a fantastic feeling. And then the challenge about the second part of it will be easily understood by my, let's say, my military colleagues, in the sense, or naval colleagues. It is about the thriller part of it. The naval has got 2 parts. It's about 30% in a traditional classic style, 70% is a thriller. Thriller is about time, space, action. It's something like our FXP, and so you've got 3 characters at various places, and there are events which are taking place. So at some part in the beginning of the book, you're writing down. So that is also something which, being a big exercise, when you write a thriller, you reveal a little bit. It's like peeling an onion. So as the reader goes, his appetite is whetted, but you're not telling the whole thing till you reach the end. So that is becomes a big circus because in the sense a whole lot of data of individuals from various background and events and time. And at times you know, there was this particular event which I quoted in the book. So I was telling about, let's say in Karachi, a terrorist-bound motorcycle shooting at some people and somebody has videographed it. So the question came, what kind of videographers? Was mobile phones available with video those days? Or were the handy cams available or you needed a full camera? Now just to find that one fact for the time that you're putting in, that event is in the book maybe it's 2 sentences, but it took me 3 days. You know, research and find out because when someone who reads it, it says that, you know, if it's in Karachi, if you're talking about a period of let's say 1995, we didn't have this particular equipment, then it becomes like, you know, what do you call that, shallow writing. So in the plus side is even when you're writing sitting in a remote place, you have the access of internet, then you have access to libraries, information, you can research and maybe buy books online, read books online, cross-check what you're writing. A fair amount of research has gone into it, every aspect about the life of the people, the society of the people, including the events like what His Highness also mentioned, how people get caught in this warp of, you know, misguided into getting into taking up the arms without knowing what they're doing, etc., etc. But having said that, let me say just look at now I'll leave everything to our Dr. Anidas who will take on from there.
And this book was such because, you know, my profession being what it is, one reads a lot in my profession. And this was a very refreshing book, so I'd really like to congratulate the author that, you know, when we look at the issues of the day and when we research into the issues of the day, and I just looked at this book and it was amazing that he included all these issues in this book. Like, for instance, there is the war on terror, and then there is the, you know, destruction of pristine landscapes due to development projects, and then there's the class conflict. And then there's even a romance across the class divide and things like that. So congratulations, you've done a very good job by including all this. And the best part is you would think that it would be a boring book with all this, but it's a very racy book. It's, you have to read it in one sitting. At least I read it in one sitting. So congratulations to you. And I would highly recommend that all of you buy the book and read it. And yeah, my first question is, would you consider this book being a thriller? Would you consider it a plot-driven novel, or would you consider it a character-driven book?
That's a good question. I would say that, you know, it has got the plot, which of course it's omnipresent in the novel, but it is a character-driven novel because it's the story of 3 people who have actually got caught in the plot. So whilst the plot has developed and as you read along, you know, there have been, at every stage you feel that they're, you know, being part of the plot, or at times by, let's say design, at times by default. But yes, the novel is driven by the characters, and as the title suggests, and I said in the beginning, it's about the power of dreams, of people to have dream and move on. So I guess it is more character driven than plot.
So, if so, who is your favorite character among the 3 main characters?
You know, it's when you create characters, you fall and empathize with all of them. So I would not like to take sides. I leave that to the audience.
So you escaped from that one. Would you consider the Dauladhar mountain range that plays a very important role in the novel, and in fact at the end of every chapter you have a little saying where the character in that section addresses the mountain and tries to look to the mountain for answers. So would you consider the mountain in some way a character in the novel?
In some ways, yes, because you almost in all the chapters where the main protagonist who has tied himself in knot and he has got no one to speak to, or he is not in a position to speak, so he speaks to the mountains. And for those of you who have lived in the mountains, and especially you spend time enough there, actually you will hear the mountains speak. So I won't be surprised, you know, that it is, I have given it that kind of a stature, that yes, it has got a certain role to play.
That's wonderful to know that someone who's so technically competent also has so much romantic elements in him that he heard the mountain speak to him. And yeah, my major question is about this love plot. And Agatha Christie, in her autobiography, she says she doesn't believe mysteries should include a romantic subplot, that it takes away from the book. What would you say? Since yours is a thriller and it has the subplot, romantic subplot, your response to this?
See that it is like, let me put it this way to you. That means to say that in a place and in a society where men and women live together, romance is part of life. So where it happens, when it happens, that is a matter of conjecture. So in any kind of novel, if someone says, it is like saying that, if you're writing about a racy thriller or a mystery thriller also, that because this plot is about a thriller that romance doesn't exist, I don't agree. Because as in our lives, across the world, anywhere, that romance is there in every society, at every level. The degree may vary, where the space in an individual's life may not be there always, but when you're writing about a story of large number of people and over a period of time, definitely yes. I believe that what is essential in telling the story of the characters, if it is there, it is okay.
Could you talk a little bit about, how easy you found it? Normally they say if it's a woman writer, she has a problem. I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but they say a woman writer has problems drawing realistic, sketching realistic male characters and vice versa, that men have difficulty creating female characters. What would you say about Rekha here?
Yeah, there is some substance to that, because I think in the sense that, I remember, because I put a heroine as a Rekha, who was a doctor, who was a passionate Kathak dancer. So when I wrote that book and when it went to the editor, she told me, I had done a fair amount of research in Kathak dance and I thought I got it technically right. She said, you got it technically right, but there's no pulse of the dancer or the character there. So I was very upset. Then I said, you think that you have done a fantastic job and, you have learned Kathak backwards. But she said, no, you haven't understood the subject. So then she said, you go and meet a Kathak dancer and interact with maybe 2-3 of them, then you will possibly be able to correct this. So I took time out through one of my friends whose wife was, again, an IT lady who had left IT to do Kathak, something which matches the profile that I put here. So I then met her. She was running a small dance school, went there, spent 2-3 days with her, spoke to her. Then I understood what the editor was telling me, because the changes that I made to what I had written was maybe about 10-12 words. But when you put the 10-12 words, then he says, it is like telling that, that you may know all the technology about serving in the military, but the guy who has served in the military will know the pulse and the mood of the guy. Someone from outside can't get it. So unless you speak to someone, you'll not get it. So this has happened not only in this, in many places. Let's say if there's a stereo of one of the characters going for a hang gliding. So in that area, so then I wrote it once, I got the same comment, then finally I decided, okay, go to, then Himachal Pradesh is a very beautiful hang gliding site. Take a joyride, then you realize, okay, there are some things which, there is so much that imagination can take you, but you need that little touch of the person from that domain who gives you that pulse. Otherwise it will not be live, characters won't be live. Yes, I've had, writing the heroine's character, because it's a little different. Just to make that story is a little off the beat. So to give an example, especially to my military friends, whilst I was a divisional officer in India, I had one of my smart guys who was one of the cadets who went on to join the India. Later on when I asked him, where is this guy? He said he was a fighter pilot in the Air Force and he just left. I said, Acha? So then I spoke to this guy later. So I asked him, what are you doing now? He said, I'm running an Adventure Club. So he said, what happened to Air Force? He said, I just left one day. He said, you're an ex-India guy, you've got to sign a bond for 20 years, how can you just leave one day? So he said, so it is like this, I thought when I joined the Air Force that fighter flying was like this. But now I realize this is not what I want to do. So I want to quit. He said, what did you do? I said, I just walked out. So then they would have court-martialed me. Yes, they did. So they called me back, court-martialed me, they gave me 3 years RI. So then he represented to the air chief. So sometime in the 90s. So air chief called him and then he just told him, sir, I have nothing. If this is what it takes for me to leave the Air Force, so be it. Then I'll do 3 years RI. Now, when then Air Chief saw that, that this guy is not, they thought people had is maybe he wants to go and join Air India and make some money and continue flying. He said, no, I'm not going to fly. He said, I thought flying was the end of it. Maybe I read some Richard Bach's book or something like that. So, but he says that is not. I thought what it was, this is not what I want to do. I just want to be myself, and I am not an individual in free flow in the system. I can't take it. So he was so candid. The Air Chief said, okay, knock off the RI, you go. When I narrate the story to even my Fauji friends, they find it difficult to believe that one, that there could be a character like this, and second, that the Fauji let him go like this. Now, similarly, so I guess very often when you research and get into characters who are off the beat, there is always that attraction as to what is considered normal run of the mill and which is beyond 3 standard deviations, people find. So to that extent, I will say like Rekha is also a character which forms in one extreme, and because of which there may be some many people ask me this, doesn't go with the pulse. I said that's it. So I guess that is where it ends.
What about the character of Nanda? Nanda, when I read your biography, Nanda has so much of you in him. So, is it autobiographical? How much of it is autobiographical?
No, first part, in the every character and every word in the book is mine. So I am there everywhere. So that much I'll claim. Because just to enlighten the audience that, I'm a very voracious reader. There was a time when I used to read a book a day. But when I started writing, one of the things I did is I stopped reading fiction in 2009 and I have not restarted. So one of the focused efforts was with an idea that I would like to create a style of writing which I'm glad that she said is, it's refreshingly different, wherein you don't feel that, he has looked at somebody else and, Control C, Control V and made a story following somebody else's format. So because of which it made it very difficult also for me, because when you think that it's very easy to say you want to be original, it's like, to give an example, when you do all this, these days you have the singing competitions and all where they say, when they say you're the selectors in one of the audience, I remember one program said, I like this singer. Then people ask him why. He said because he has got a voice which is different from, we don't want another Kishore Kumar or a Muhammad Rafi or one of the existing singers. You want somebody who will be different, known by his name. So similarly, when I took to writing, that was the aim. So yes, I have used my, let's say, because I grew up in Kerala, so I know about Kerala society and what goes in there. I worked in a hydroelectric project, that is autobiographical, whatever is technical part of the project is what we have done. So that I agree. Then I have tried my best to avoid the character being a reflection of me or what my aspirations are. I leave to my friends who know me to read and say whether it is actually autobiographical or it's someone else. But to the extent that yes, heroism Malayali, yes, if that is being autobiographical, yes, to that extent it is. But that is where it ends. The rest of it, possibly I think the best judge will be the reader. People who know me when they read it will know whether it goes with his, he has just changed name and then, gone back 20 years and decided to jump around the mountains playing whatever, casino all over again. That is not so. But I leave the judgment to the readers. It does not by design.
Finally, I'm sure you're not going to be happy with this question. It's about the female character, about Rekha. And I really had a problem with this character because she's a very accomplished dancer. She is internationally famous. She travels all over the world. She has so many suitors and very, dancers and accomplished men, and she turns them all down. She's also a trained doctor. And finally, she falls in love at first sight with this unlettered terrorist just because he's good looking, he's younger than her, and he abducts her, and then she falls head over heels in love with this. I hope I'm not revealing too much of the plot here, but I really had a problem with this, how could she she considers herself such a evolved woman, and then how could she, in my point of view, that was kind of regressive. What would you like to say?
That has been actually one of the major challenges while writing the book also, because one of the things that I'll tell you that it's when you put conditions which are beyond normal, when it is life-threatening, when the situations are beyond the control or what you can possibly imagine, how people would behave. Now that is an area which is not normal. It's not normal because that is not beyond, goes beyond the normal definitions of what we know. So here what we are shown here is that she is actually, she is not, let's say kind of, the situation has got the better of her, that she's been kidnapped by somebody and whatever happens, happens in a kidnap situation where her life is at, let's say, at stake. Now whether in that condition where someone erudite or not erudite will, turn out without telling the story, so this, which is what she has said. That is where it is actually possibly the challenging part, wherein a lot of thinking has gone inside. In those kind of situations, so people who handle difficult situations and let's say life-threatening situations, or for that matter, another character where where the ISI is known for manipulating the women to toe their line and do whatever they want them to do. Those are areas which comes with a certain amount of question mark always. But the only golden rule people say is that it is the most educated and the most erudite people. Once a point is broken, they are more vulnerable than a regular guy. So there, things go far more than this.
Maybe time for just one question. What I really loved about the book is it presents India as a very modern, technologically advanced country where things are really working, where things are going right. I really love that about the book because, we've come from this tradition of Arvind Adiga and so on, where everything is bad about India, and these are the books that win the award. So just for that, I think I highly appreciate this book because it showcases all of India's talents, and in fact there's some two characters who are IT experts, and they're so good at their work that everybody consults them all over the world, and even the very Heidel project itself, there are a few Italian characters, but most of the people are Indians and they're so competent at their work. So for that, I really love this book, and it really should buy it and read it just for that. For showing that dreams are possible in modern India. Just for that, it's wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Anita, for an interesting conversation. Question answer session. Since we are running out of time, 10 minutes I'll allocate, and one question per person. No speeches, please. Meera.
You've been reading a lot of books, but past 4 or 5 years you have not done much of reading. So is it because you wanted to write the book and not be influenced by anything that you read?
I stopped reading when I started writing. I started writing in 2009. I stopped reading along with that. I was truly worried that if I read parallelly, I know that the so-called India is known for plagiarism. I mean, to the extent that after I wrote the book, when I approached a publisher, that lady told me, before you send it to anywhere, first upload it on Amazon. I said, why? Because he says, whenever you have research data, the fair chances that your book may not see the light of the day, but any worthwhile material will find its way to somewhere else. So then the first thing that I did was to upload an unedited version onto Amazon. Because what she said is, then I didn't know. At that point in time, I was not thinking in those lines, but then I said, okay, I'll do that. So similarly, I mean, through that, one of my editors, when she was writing, she asked me, where is this village, Musdi village? I said, and it's not there in the Google. I said, so? I said, it's not there anywhere. I said, good, that means, at least no one else has used it before, no? So you should be happy. So I guess to that extent, till now no one has said of any word unless I've quoted somewhere somebody or the technical part. It has still remained authentic.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, military officers are interested only in guns, not in men. What motivated to write a fiction on simple and humble folk you met? Any role model for you in the literary field?
Role models for in literary field, I will say R.K. Narayan, if I would so about from Indian. But otherwise, I do appreciate a whole lot of authors, I mean, including Walt Soyinka or Chinua Achebe, or may not be the best, or even let's even pulp fiction writer or popular fiction writer like Harold Robinson, or go back to the Russian. There are many authors whom I've liked, but I have not based this on any of them. So I think what she said, which I also had in mind, is that whilst we have so many things wrong with our society and wrong with our country, not everything is wrong. So it's a question of glass is half empty or half full. So possibly the novel has taken most of the time the approach of half full than half empty.
Anybody else? I think people are anxious to get back home. Hey, one last question, yeah.
Well, you're a literature student. I think English literature, that's what you have mentioned. Again, probably it's a repeat of my question, the earlier one. Have you been influenced by anything that you have read?
Actually, you know, I will not say particularly one, that by virtue of having done that postgraduate in English literature, I was exposed to the way various writers have come up over a period of time, which were the topics and why someone wrote the way they wrote. And it does come with a certain amount of philosophy that, you know, the existential philosophy is ruled at some point in time, or, you know, the Tess of Somerville and that kind of stories, and how stories changed from period of time, which as an understanding when you write is important. That means your development of writing and thinking of people and how society has influenced them. Because when you write a fiction, now I also believe today also if you write a fiction that you need to have more than fair knowledge about our society and the thinking of people and the value systems, because when you write, maybe what you write is only a word. It has to be backed up with 1,000 words or 1,000,000 words. So to that extent, in widening the horizons, answer is yes. Individually, any authors, I've liked many of our, let's say, R.K. Narayan or let's say V.S. Naipaul or any of the authors that I mentioned. They are phenomenal writers to read and understand, and I've appreciated them. In this particular writing of mine, any of them are influenced? Answer is no. And I leave that, you know, I said, you know, till now at least, the one thing that I've got from all the readers till now has been that it is refreshingly different, and at least that can be only for first novel. That's the second one, of course.
Thank you very much. The book is available for sale at 395 rupees, published by Niyogi Publishers Books. Next month there are 2 meetings scheduled. Unfortunately, I don't have the details. It will come to you in due course. I thank Dr. Anita Balakrishnan and Subhi for singing, and thanks a lot for being part of the function. Thank you.